Welcome to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. Do you wonder how your faith fits together with your profession? Well, join us as we explore how to live well at the intersection of two roads crossing.
Well, hello and welcome to Two Roads Crossing. I am Barry Schwenk, a veterinarian, a pastor, and your host, as we explore the intersection of faith and vocation. This is part 3 in a series with Dr. Karen Stoufer, a former international missionary, former CVM area director for Asia, former CVM training director. There's a lot of formers in your title, but it's great to have you back with us again, Karen. How's everything going so far today?
Pretty good, thank you. It's a good day.
It's always fun to sit down and talk with you, and we have been having a conversation about gospel and culture. And you introduced this idea to us through Jason George's book, The 3D Gospel, talking about three predominant worldviews that kind of shape the way that we understand the gospel, the way that we hear the gospel, the way we receive the gospel, and even the way that we share the gospel. And in our last session, we were specifically talking about the honor-shame context. And we talked about how the honor-shame cultural context or worldview shapes the way that families interact with one another, the way that relationships are built, and even a way that the gospel, and I really appreciated what you said last time about there's not a right way or a wrong way, and beautifully the gospel meets each and every one of those worldviews. So the gospel is built in a way to meet each and every one of us where we are, but it's important for us to understand that other cultural context. And I wanted us today to move into the next phase, which is as veterinary professionals, how does that cultural context, specifically the honor-shame context, how does that impact us as veterinary professionals?
Well, in most honor-shame cultures, formal education qualifications are very highly respected, and those without formal education or lesser credentials will give honor and respect to those in higher positions. As veterinary professionals, we'll be accorded honor due to our position. We don't necessarily earn it by performance. Honor is our due by virtue of position. And as Christians, we need to not only learn how to receive honor appropriately, but also how to give honor and how to follow Christ's example of honoring those usually experiencing shame. How we bring honor to others in appropriate ways is something we need to understand and learn.
That can be kind of tough, because I'm thinking about speaking as someone from a predominant guilt innocence background, that's a tough pill to swallow. The idea that I'm just afforded respect because of my title or because of my position, and honestly, for a lot of Christians, even we struggle with this idea that we positionally are given honor in Christ, because what we want to do in our cultural context, we want to earn it, right? We want to do things. And unfortunately, there's this small word, grace, that we sometimes in our guilt innocence, we struggle with that word quite a bit. And for someone working within our own cultural context, or within my own cultural context, connecting to that idea of being respected just because of my title can be really tough. So what would be some ways then, especially coming from a predominant guilt innocence, what's a predominant or possible ways maybe that we can, through our vocation, that we can bring honor to others the same way that Christ has brought honor to us?
Well, I think how we interact every day with those around us can reflect our desire to treat others the way Jesus did, which is with honor, whether we're from an honor-shame culture or not. And I do want to mention that honor-shame culture is not limited to any one particular religion. Hindus, Buddhists, Muslims, atheists, Jews, and Christians can all be found in honor-shame cultures.
Yeah, and that's a good reminder, because and I think you touched on it in the very first session when we were kind of introducing the 3D gospel concept. We each have maybe a predominant worldview that we lean towards, but there's a little bit. There are times when honor shame creeps into my life, and there's a time when fear power creeps into my life. So there's a little bit of everything in it, and it's a great reminder that this is, although it may be predominantly found in a particular culture, it crosses lines. And even here in the United States, you're gonna come face to face with people of various cultural backgrounds that have different worldviews and different cultural and different heart contexts as it applies to the gospel. And it's important to remember. And for veterinarians, this is a great thing to know, because we do come in contact with an awful lot of folks, whether in clinic settings, abroad, and if we're respected and within the honor shame context. Since veterinarians are so highly respected in a position of imparting knowledge, or even teaching clients, and even outside, I guess I should say even outside the honor shame context, because the role of a veterinarian within communities throughout the United States is much the same. Our job is to impart knowledge, to teach clients. It might be in a farm setting, it might be with animal healthcare workers in a different country. So what would be some ways, despite the context, despite where we might be doing this, or who we might be doing this with, what might be some ways that veterinary professionals could show honor to the people that they're working with?
Well, there are 5 basic principles that we can use for teaching that come from working within a honor shame culture, or with those from that culture that honor rather than dishonor the other person. And I think they apply in the US just as well as overseas. And that first principle is to remember that education is your reputation. People from honor shame cultures study for a formal certificate or to get initials after their name more than they study for the content. Education will bring honor to the extended family, especially the parents, not just to the trainee or the student. Even if you conduct a 3-day farmer training, it may be very important to issue a certificate and to present that certificate to the trainee in a way that honors the person who's completing that training course.
Well, and I think this is a great thing to remember, because if we default to this idea that honor shame is only in a cross-cultural setting, we forget that there is an awful lot of veterinarians who like to have letters after their names. the more letters, the more of a reputation that you have, the more respect that you have, and that's it doesn't matter where you are in the world. That can be a very important thing. What about for within a clinic setting? How does that apply within a clinic setting for folks?
Well, I think in a clinic setting, we're often finding ourselves teaching. We're teaching the client a new concept or how to administer a medication. And it's nice if you can honor the client. For instance, tell their family or say it in front of the waiting room. Oh, Naya's now been trained how to use the medicine. I'm confident she'll do a great job helping Fluffy recover. Or even a more natural way for many of us would be to have the technician teach the client how to administer the medicine, and then be sure the technician gets the opportunity to praise the client in front of you so that they feel honored. In Asia, we trained village animal health workers, and the way we dealt with this was 6 months after the training, we would go to visit their village. We would stay with their family. We'd talk over cases with the animal health worker, which is a kind of continuing education for them. But most importantly, we'd call the whole community together for a village-wide meeting. And at that meeting, we would talk about the health of the livestock, and we would praise and promote the work of their animal health worker. This honored the worker And the basic fact that we traveled from far away just to stay with this worker overnight would bring honor and respect to the worker and their family.
That I like this idea, because even from a clinical standing, you have already this position of honor, and the way that you interact with your technicians, the way that you interact with your clients, in just very small ways, changes so much because the way that you praise them. I like that, that word, the way that you praise or honored them, pointing out what they know, what they're capable of doing, helps to encourage and to build up. And even for someone who doesn't have a predominant honor shame context, that goes a long way. Being gracious with your words and using that position that you have in order to build others up. I'm sure that in that way, you will find the relationship that you have with those individuals. It's not a matter of you necessarily being torn down to build them up, but rather using your position of respect in order to bring honor to them, would go such a long way in professional relationships, personal relationships, and so on. So you said there's 5 principles. What's the second principle?
That would be that teachers are revered. It's actually the role of the student to bring honor to the teacher. So as teachers, we have to behave in ways that can be respected. For example, when I started training animal health workers overseas, I tried to create an informal sharing environment by sitting on the desk rather than standing behind a podium in the classroom. That was a really big no-no culturally. I was disrespecting my students, and I was disrespecting their desire to honor me by not behaving in a respectful way. Another aspect of that can be that students may give gifts to the teacher to show respect. We need to accept reasonable gifts with gratitude and humility and find ways to return that honor. We also need to be able to discern between honest gifts that honor us as a sign of respect and the few that might actually be bribes. But we should never assume that they're all bribes. They're ways that they want to honor and respect us for what knowledge and skills we've shared with them.
And that's a little bit, that's a little bit different than what we experience here, talking as the spouse of a middle school teacher. That's interesting that students want and desire to bring honor, to revere their teachers. There probably isn't nearly as much talking back, confrontation, or even disobedience probably within those classrooms then.
For sure, there is not the degree of that we see in this country. Students primarily will go to great lengths to avoid shaming their teacher. This means that they may not ask questions, because asking a question might imply that the teacher hasn't made it clear. And so they don't want to imply that in any way, and they will say they understand and not ask a question, even if they are totally confused and lost. Students also may not give honest feedback to the teacher about the teaching or the course. They will all say that it was good, because that's a way of honoring the teacher who delivered the course. And if we want to use participatory training methods, which they may be unfamiliar with, it's helpful to present that as a way that honors the participant and their experiential knowledge and skills without demeaning the role of the instructor.
That's going to be a unique challenge for most folks that come from a guilt innocence perspective, trying to adjust to that. But I think that understanding, one, that you have this position, that you have that your education gives you a certain reputation, and that the way that students within that honor shame context perceive you, we need to be sensitive to that. We need to not be disrespectful to their understanding, which may mean that we have to change not only the way that we approach teaching, but also the way that we receive feedback, the way that we, you mentioned earlier about giving certificates as a way to honor. But for most teachers, you also want to be able to evaluate whether someone understands what you're saying. And so not just blanketly moving forward or giving rewards, but doing so with honor and respect is an important thing. That's a little bit of a departure, and it could be rather easy for someone within our cultural context to even take advantage of something like that, because we may not be sensitive to what is actually being understood by our students. It would be really easy for us to develop a big head. Everyone loves us. Everyone brings us apples on our table. I don't know if apples are appropriate or not, but apples to our desk, and think that everything is going well when we may not really be making the impact that we think is necessary. So showing students showing respect to teachers or revering teachers, and then and recognizing that your education is the position of respect. What's the third principle that you want to share?
I think it's really helpful to remember that the students often come from very honorable families, meaning in an honored position, especially if we're looking at the case of students or families who come from honor shame cultures to America. But it can also apply to a trainee where the whole village got together and selected them, honored them by sending them to this farmer training. Now, when students come to America, they often have a very difficult time figuring out where they fit into our social structure, which is very important to them, or how to adapt to American behaviors that feel dishonoring to them. For instance, a highly respected doctor in his home country may find it difficult to initially have to do menial labor here in this country, or to not automatically go to the front of the line. And rather than writing them off as arrogant or ignorant, we can try to find appropriate ways to honor them. And similarly, different cultures honor academic success differently, and we need to learn when and how it's appropriate. If you're in a communal culture where people are honorable when they fit in and benefit the group, then signaling one person out as the highest achiever in the group may cause shame and disrespect for that person from the rest of the group, which leads us on to the next principle.
Well, and it's really strange because that's our goal, right? Our goal is to be the number one student. We want to bring shame to everyone else around us. We want to have the highest GPA, and it's so interesting just to hear that, and the way that we even show praise and the way that we show honor within our guilt innocence predominant worldview is different than the way that we show honor and give praise within this within honor shame context. I'm sorry, go on. I'm thinking about all those times when my dad wanted me to be number one. And so
yeah, that's a really big deal what you're saying. Even in Nepal, where I work, there was a saying about pulling someone's leg, and it does not mean what it means here in America. Here we say if you pull someone's leg, you're kidding them or telling a joke. It's not at all about jokes over there. It's very serious. It's what your group will do to you to pull you back down if you try to move ahead and be the best achiever in your group rather than sharing with the group. Because learning happens collectively. Families and networks are really important. Most of life depends on who you know more than what you know. So in teaching, if we can allow students to work in groups and complete assignments in groups, that's really helpful. On tests, students may often try to work together. They honestly see that as helping, not cheating. And they value those in the group who help one another and are not out to get individual praise.
And that's interesting because even within Christianity, right? This is a unique thing, because I can remember hearing stories celebrating someone who was no longer accepted by their community because of coming to Christ. And so is that a real is that something like, I guess, would they be pulling his leg to get him to get him back into the group?
Yeah, absolutely. In honor shame cultures, often many families will accept Christianity as a group when the family leader accepts Christ. And they will view an individual member of the family as bringing shame or being disrespectful to their parents if they accept Christ when they belong to a non-Christian family. Our Hindu friend Mukti began visiting our church, and when that happened, his uncle told him quite clearly that he had to stop being so disrespectful to his parents. And I think they often wonder why Christians don't respect their parents, because they encourage other people to disrespect their parents by becoming Christians.
And it's a separation, it's a separation from the group. And so that brings the biblical story all the way back around, right? When we talk about someone and their household coming to Christ, once again, and you mentioned this, I think in the first or even the second session, about how much of the New Testament is written from an honor shame perspective. And when we read that, we don't quite fully grasp it. But it was something, even in Ethiopia, there had been a village that one of the missionaries had been going to for quite a while, doing chronological Bible storying, and had been there for a year telling Bible stories every week. And at the end, got to the very end of the scripture lessons, and he said, what do you think about this? And the village elder said, come back in 2 weeks and we'll give you an answer. And he said, I didn't ask a question. I mean, that wasn't a hard question, but 2 weeks later he came back, and the elder said, we've discussed it. We've heard all that you have to say, and we accept Jesus. And then the whole village was baptized. And that's for us, we're like, wow, that's such a strange thing, and or a wonderful thing. And yet it's not unique to that cultural context. And understanding that changes. And I think to that point, one of the things that we were doing even in Ethiopia was not what we would call individual evangelism, but it was group community evangelism. Everyone was together. We were presenting the gospel to everyone together and showing, I think, respect to the community and to the community elders. And I think that really got us a lot further ahead within that context. What's the fifth and final principle?
Well, it's about food, sharing food.
I like this one. Let's spend some time here.
Yeah, we need to spend some time, because while sharing food symbolizes relationships in our culture as well as in honor shame cultures, there's a lot of differences as how it's done in honor shame cultures. For instance, it really honors someone to host an honored guest, like a teacher or a veterinarian, for a meal. So we can show honor by finding those opportunities to share meals. If we're at a farmer training, we should eat with the participants rather than as a separate instructor table. If we're at a school or a university, we can go out to eat together, or we can invite guests to our students as guests to our home after we make sure we've learned some culturally appropriate foods and etiquette. But most importantly, we can just accept invitations to join a student for a meal or for coffee when they invite us. And we should be careful to always invite more than once if we happen to be in a culture where a first refusal is considered polite.
Did you just say a first refusal might be considered polite? Is that what you just said? Okay.
That's right. That's right. Often people say, oh, no, no, no. And they don't mean no, no, no. They mean ask me again.
Ask me again. Oh, okay. All right. So I think that you and I are going to have to have more of a conversation. We may have to go into part 4 because let me just say this. So food is such a central thing to all of us. We all have, but on top of that, there's so many rules around food and what's acceptable. And when you said, even turning down a first invitation, I wouldn't have even thought of that as being a thing that I would have to I would have to consider. Did you find, so with food, did you find that it took a while in Nepal to navigate and figure out what was appropriate or inappropriate from a food standpoint?
Absolutely. In Nepal, rice is really central to the culture, and there are rules about who you can serve rice to and who has to serve it and who you can share rice with, and there are times when it would be inappropriate to serve rice and you have to find something else to serve in this particular context.
In Ethiopia, it was all about the coffee, and it was about the number. And even the coffee was more than just drinking the coffee. It was the ceremony that goes along with the coffee, and how many cups of coffee you drink and where you put your coffee cup and how you turn your coffee cup. So there was a lot. I understand. I understand. But I would love to explore this just a little bit more, because it seems like, potentially there's just a lot of rules. And when you come from one cultural worldview, navigating the rules of another cultural worldview can be rather tricky. And, even the things like you said about pointing out who's the number one student, we might do that to show honor, and yet it's not heard or received as honor. And so I'm sure that there are lots of ways that, whether it's here or abroad, that we found ourselves in situations where someone was offended by something that we've done or said, even though we never intended to offend. And so I would like to chat some more with you about how we may accidentally be offending people and how we can navigate through that. And then also, you mentioned earlier participatory training, and participatory training is a great way for us as veterinary professionals to show honor to those that we're serving, but also it could be done in a way that could also bring offense. And so, is that something that we can maybe chat about in another session?
Great idea.
Okay. All right. So, our time for today has drawn quickly to a close, and I appreciate that, because that means that we've had a lot to talk about. So I appreciate those 5 principles that you have shared with us, and hopefully, as folks are listening, maybe some of those things are starting to make a little bit of sense about maybe someone that you're currently working with or around, ways that that maybe if we begin to see a different perspective or understand a different worldview, we may be better ambassadors for Christ, more effective ministers of the gospel. So until next time, I pray that this time together has been a blessing to you, and join us as I am joined one more time, 4th time, with Dr. Karen Stoufer, as we discuss participatory training and the ways that we may accidentally or inadvertently be offending others. And by doing so, hopefully we learn how to live well at the intersection of 2 roads crossing.
Thank you for listening to 2 Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. If you were blessed by this content, like and subscribe so that you are alerted when new content is released. If you would like more information about CVM, or if you have questions, comments, or topical suggestions, you can find us online at www.cvm.org. Or you can contact us by emailing podcast@cvm.org. God has a plan for the nations, and that plan includes you. We pray that CVM has encouraged you to live out your calling with confidence and competence. So, until next time, may the voice of the shepherd ring loud and clear as you follow him in faith to the intersection of 2 roads crossing.